Out of the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Donald Trump has formally launched his so-called Board of Peace. The initiative was originally part of his Gaza peace plan and was meant to oversee the ceasefire and reconstruction of the Palestinian territory. Now, the US president said it could rival the United Nations, and he's charging $1 billion to become a permanent member.
This is the moment President Trump launched his Board of Peace. Initially tasked with helping maintain the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and chaired by the US president himself.
This board has the chance to be one of the most consequential bodies ever created, and it's my enormous honor to serve as its chairman. I was very honored when they asked me to do it.
Some 60 countries have been invited to join, but US officials say only half of them accepted so far. Trump was joined by some representatives on stage to sign the founding charter in Davos. Supporters say this newly formed board could be more effective than the UN.
Because of the very complex decision-making procedure that exists in the UN, there are more than just one country that have a veto. This has made things very, very difficult. Now, with this new organization, with the Board of Peace, I am very confident that peace can be carried forward in a much less complex way of decision-making.
But the initiative has drawn criticism from some leaders. European allies, including France, Britain, Norway and Sweden, have cited concerns it could undermine the UN, despite Trump's pledge to work alongside it.
Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. You know, I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it.
With more than 80% of Gaza's infrastructure destroyed over the last 2 years, people there are skeptical of the new announcements.
No matter how much he says, it's all in vain. Why? Because we, as citizens, aren't seeing any real change on the ground. The suffering remains the same. Rain, there are no tents, no shelters. As you can see, the destruction. Wood, we don't have that.
The shelling and the bombing are happening almost daily. There's nothing new. What we hear on TV is completely false. There's no ceasefire, nothing at all. As for reconstruction, this is empty talk. As you can see, there's no optimism.
Whether the Board of Peace brings stability to Gaza remains the billion-dollar question.
Rosa Freedman is a professor of law, conflict and global development at the University of Reading in the UK. Welcome to DW, Professor. The UN proving to be increasingly ineffective. Is Donald Trump's idea worth a shot?
The UN is not ineffective, as you say. It was designed to prevent another world war on the back of 2 world wars in quick succession. And ever since 1945, it's achieved that aim. Now, where it comes to resolving conflicts, there are obviously intractable ones. For example, the one in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. But there have been many conflicts that the UN has resolved, whether through negotiation, mediation, through the UN Security Council, or even through peacekeeping forces. What Donald Trump is doing with this Board of Peace is simply trying to bypass the UN, trying to create a new global organization that would be headed by him and whoever he anoints as his successor. And even, as we've seen in the last hour or so, producing a badge that looks effectively like the UN badge, but with the US at the center of it. And I think that symbolism is really crucial for understanding what this Board of Peace actually is.
So what do you understand it to be? Why is this such a bad idea?
It's not necessarily a bad idea to have a group of mediators and states who are actively involved in seeking to resolve conflicts. In fact, that's what we all want, is fewer wars and more peace. But this Board of Peace, as it's being called, has grown and developed from a kind of embryonic idea around the war in Gaza, or even the conflict between Israel and Palestine, to becoming what looks like a kind of global organization that is not created through consent of states, but rather through the bullying of those countries to join in. And we can see that that's clearly the case from the way the European countries, including the UK, have reacted by saying they're not quite ready to join something that they don't know what it is, what the mandate is, what its powers are, accountability structures, or indeed how it will grow and develop over coming months, let alone years or decades.
You say that, but I mean, when you look at the figures, 60-odd invitations sent out, about 30 yeses. The only 7 firm no's are Europeans. What do you think the undecideds, who include China, Ukraine and Russia, what do you think they are waiting for?
Well, if we look at the 30 yeses, these are countries that rely heavily on the United States, whether for trade, whether around other forms of economics, but also in terms of their own peace and security. The countries that have power, power to stand up to the US, whether it's over Greenland, as your previous interview was discussing, or whether it's around the Board of Peace or in any other way, are either saying a firm no or they're undecided. Now, it's very difficult to look at an undecided from China and from Russia and to say that there is one homogenous answer as to why they are undecided. But it's clear that the United States is seeking to create some form of new empire for the modern era, and that this Board of Peace is just one part of that, and that there are countries still willing to stand up against it.
The first task facing this board, as you mentioned at the start of your answers, is implementing the Gaza ceasefire and overseeing the redevelopment of the Gaza Strip. President Trump's son-in-law and special envoy, Jared Kushner, has given a presentation at Davos showing residential developments and seafront skyscrapers. He talked about building a city for 2 to 3 million people in a couple of years once Hamas is disarmed. What do you make of that timeline?
Well, first of all, the idea for the second phase of the peace plan for Gaza was reliant on all of the hostages being released, and there are still the remains of one hostage, Rangavili, in Gaza. But it's also dependent on the disarming of Hamas. And what we've seen is that Hamas is becoming stronger and stronger and rearming by the day, for every day that the ceasefire is in place. What we're also seeing is a continued subjugation and oppression of the Gazans by Hamas, particularly those Gazans that tried to stand up against this terrorist organization and were brutally executed quite publicly over the weeks and months since the ceasefire came into play. In terms of rebuilding a very small strip of land where the air, sea and land borders are controlled by Israel, rebuilding it and having skyscrapers and beachfront villas is seemingly a fantasy. Right now, what Gaza needs is desperately water and sanitation, electricity for buildings that need to be pulled down to be then rebuilt so that people are not living in tent cities. And also what they need is to not be living under the control of a terrorist organization that has brutalized the Strip for nearly 2 decades.
Good talking to you, Professor. Professor Rosa Freedman from the University of Reading.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Hady. He's a former US Special Representative for Palestinian Affairs, now at the Brookings Institution in Washington. Hady, great to have you with us. You've been critical of the Board of Peace. Why is that?
Thanks for having me. This is an important conversation. Look, I think I want to come at this from 2 ways, but we owe it to the tens of thousands innocent people who were slaughtered to kind of move forward in a smart way. Look, on the one hand, Donald Trump is the most transactional president in our lifetimes. He's proud of that. On the other hand, if you're a believer in multilateralism, the rule of law, all of these things, we should really be concerned about this. On the one hand, the Board of Peace leverages the legitimacy of a UN resolution, but it's not peace architecture, it's control architecture. It's not multilateralism. When Trump retains a lifetime veto on this board, beyond which, after he even serves as president and is the sole person who can name his successor, this isn't one state, one vote when one man, Donald Trump, has a veto. And so while I think we should all care deeply about the situation in Gaza, and the world owes it to the people there to find a pathway forward to rebuild and reconstruct, this particular structure is deeply unorthodox, is a threat to the multilateral system, and it's unclear if it's going to work in a productive, legitimate, and democratic way.
7 countries, all European, have turned down the invitation so far, while others such as Russia, China and Ukraine are still undecided. Without going country by country, have you seen enough, Hady, to get a feel for how the world feels about this concept?
Well, you know, what's really interesting is that, and if I understand correctly, you know, Canadian Prime Minister Carney has said that they would be part of it, and you know, notwithstanding his criticisms of Donald Trump at the World Economic Forum. What I think is really interesting is that there are 8 key Muslim majority countries: Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi, Pakistan, Turkey, and the UAE, which issued a joint statement upon joining the board, and basically said, you know, we're willing to join the board. But this needs to be re-grounded in international law, and I think they did it kind of smartly. They said, "Look, this makes sense to us if it puts us on a pathway to Palestinian self-determination, statehood, and security for all countries." And so, what these kind of Muslim majorities countries did, and I think they were skeptical, said, "We'll play along for now, if this advances Palestinian rights and Palestinian statehood." But it's really unclear how this works. And I just really want to remind, it's very important for all of your viewers to understand, the bylaws of the Board of Peace don't mention Israel, they don't mention Palestine, they don't even mention Gaza. They're setting up a structure to apply this process to the entire world in an alternative to the United Nations and the rules-based international system that we've all come to know. Now, sorry to go on for so long, I want to say one more point. What has made this possible? I'd say what has made this possible is the failure of the rules of the international community to properly address the situation in Gaza. And it's that failure that enabled Trump to come in and fill the vacuum.
So the board's first task, with all of that in mind, is implementing the Gaza peace plan and overseeing the redevelopment of the Gaza Strip. Trump's son-in-law, Jared, has presented a master plan for Gaza, complete with seafront skyscrapers. Knowing what we know and what you've said about the situation in Gaza now, do you think it's realistic that we get somewhere here?
Look, notwithstanding the AI-generated images in the Trump plan, the situation on the ground in Gaza remains absolutely catastrophic. There is still hunger. There is still homelessness. There are still hundreds of thousands of kids who are not properly educated. And so to take the journey from the abject misery of Gaza today to the, you know, Dubai-esque skyline that they used AI to generate, I think it's going to take a long while. But the Palestinians have key tasks now, and I do want to say this. You know, I think the local Gaza committee that's being set up under this framework is made up of some good people. Nikolai Mladenov is a former colleague of mine and a friend, and he's a smart, hardworking, you know, kind of honest broker. And so those are good signs. But the journey that needs to be taken is an extremely long one. And it needs to work effectively. It needs to be grounded in Palestinian legitimacy. And without that legitimacy, it's just not going to work. And the central component to that is going to have to be legitimate national Palestinian elections. You know, at least a time horizon to get to them in the year or so ahead.
Hady Amr, it's been great to get you on. It's a very important conversation, as you say. Former US Special Representative for Palestinian Affairs, now at the Brookings Institution in Washington. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation.